Hello, 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 and welcome to Updog Sports Talk. My name is Matt Miller. As always, joining me today is Justin McGovern. Looking pretty
Well,
good there, Justin.
appreciate it.
Pulled the
Um,
beard back a little bit. I'm growing mine out.
yeah, my off-season beard, I had to give it a trim a little bit. We're in the middle of it right now. The off-season of college football is probably one of the longest and most exhausting with some of the stuff gets proposed, but we're here to give you a vacation from that. We're going to talk about what we love about the sport, which is the product on the field. And starting today, we're going to be grading how we felt each team did in the sport, starting with the SEC, Big Ten, and independents.
I'm having some technical difficulties over here. My mic is trying to fall over. Um, Here at Updog Sports Talk, we may not have the multi-million dollar budget, um, but we try. We not only represent the bottom half of each sport, we do talk about the top half as well. But we spend, would you say, about the same amount of time on every team if they.
Yep. And
Um,
that is exactly what we are doing with this series. We did have to come up with an order with it. So, we did just kind of go by non-conference winning percentage. It's not an exact science. We're not trying to rank how good the conferences were, but it just gave us an order that we could go in order to, just go through. By the end of this, we will have gone through all 134 teams.
nice. I can't wait. Let's get started, Justin. Let's jump right in.
Yeah, let's get this bad boy going. We start in the SEC with the Alabama Crimson Tide. They went 9-4 this year. Year one under Kalen DeBoer, missing the college football playoffs. So is that a sign of trouble or growing pains? That's something we'll have to figure out. Matt, what did you give for your grade for Alabama?
I gave him a C minus. I don't think it, like, if you're comparing Caleb DeBoer to Nick Saban, then it's probably an F. But if you're just looking at it as new regime comes in, there are high expectations. They did lose to a few bottom teams, but it's going to be growing pains because it's a completely separate system. So that's why I didn't give them total F grade. So C minus. I think the future will be bright, but I think it's going to take a couple years for him to get his own players in there.
Yeah, you took a lot of what I was going to say. I gave him a C plus. I was a little bit more generous, but my reasoning remains the same as yours. This season was definitely below the expectation of Alabama. I don't think we could have ever fathomed in the 12-team playoff era that Alabama would miss the playoff, but that is what happened this year. The bowl loss definitely did not feel good for them either. But at the same time, this was his first year, and I know at least we'll see this as we go along. In my grading, I tried to be a little bit more generous to first year head coaches just because they're just getting started with a program. So we move on to our next team on the list. We are going in alphabetical order. Arkansas. The Razorbacks took a step forward in 2024. Do we feel like it was a big enough step forward, or could they have accomplished more? Matt, what is your grade for the Arkansas Razorbacks?
I gave them a C. I feel like they had higher expectations if KJ Jefferson had stayed and been their quarterback. Once he left, I don't think expectations were very high. I didn't have high expectations for them, but I think they middle of the pack, they get a C.
Yeah, I give him a C plus. So, for one, let's not forget, Bobby Petrino, at how that whole thing ended, they brought that guy back. They brought him back to be their offensive coordinator. I have to mention it because it's still, we're in the whole new offseason, but last offseason, that had to be one of the most absurd moves that anyone made. And he's still there, by the way. Like, he's still their offensive coordinator. So he came in, kind of gave their offense a little bit of improvement, even with KJ Jefferson gone. We could talk about KJ Jefferson on a later show, but they had Taylor Green come in from Boise State. He did a fine job. Arkansas spent a lot of the year putting up a lot of yards, but not having the points to show for it. Obviously, the worst example was when they played Oklahoma State and doubled them up in yardage, and had an early lead, but ended up losing in overtime to a team that won 0 Big 12 games. So that was a down point for them. But they did get a win over a Tennessee team that went to the college football playoff. That was pretty good. That was one of the most notable wins we've seen from Arkansas in some time. So that one little win there was enough to bump them up to a plus in my book. Moving on to our next team, Auburn Tigers. What do we make of Hugh Freeze and Auburn after another disappointing year? 5-7 was the record, and that's not the standard.
I'm going to use my all-time favorite phrase for Auburn. They're "fuck you, yours." We don't know where, I think they had high expectations of themselves, but they did not live up to those high expectations. I mean, it's freezing down there in Auburn. I think Hugh Freeze, I think it's time for him to pack up and leave. I think they got to go a different direction if they want to turn around.
Consider that a freeze warning.
I gave him a D. That's.
Oh yes. We forgot to have you see the grade for a moment. I was even worse. I gave him a D minus. I mean, 5-7 is just not acceptable. They spent a lot of games finding ways to lose, finding ways to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And it was a very bad year. They got the win over Texas A&M late in the year to kind of make themselves feel a little bit better and finally close the game out. But, I think at some point we have to question whether, because Hugh Freeze seems to have a reputation as a quarterback whisperer, but I think at some point we have to question whether that's actually true, because he hasn't been getting the most out of quarterbacks in a long time. And I mean, if you really look at it, we have what Bo Wallace said about him during the season after one of his losses and stuff. We have to wonder if a quarterback can't succeed with him unless they have a brash personality like Chad Kelly did. That's really the only quarterback, when you look back, that was truly successful under his watch. So, I mean, this offseason, Auburn's hitting the portal. They're hitting recruiting, trying to improve, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Next up, the Florida Gators. What were the keys here to what turned out to be a strong finish for the Gators? We entered the season, everyone said Billy Napier is done. They faced the hardest schedule in the country, and they went 8-5.
I gave him a C plus. I actually had Billy Napier on the chopping block, and I think he saved his job at least for another year. I didn't have high expectations of Florida. They threw DJ Lagway in there a little bit, and I'm starting to like him. I think that he can turn things around for them if they put the right pieces around him.
Yeah, and I think Lagway was definitely the key to their bit of a strong finish down the stretch. Beating LSU, Ole Miss, Florida State, and then a Tulane team that was missing their offense. But Lagway did a pretty good job. He really helped bring a star to the quarterback position, and I think that was a huge first step. Now it'll be interesting to see how they build off this finish, how they continue to build the roster. I gave them a B because 8-5 was pretty good against the schedule they went up against. It was a rough schedule. So we move on to next stop here, which is the Georgia Bulldogs. They went 11-3. And I think the question is, what has happened to the standard at Georgia? Because, we saw before I let you dive into the grade, we saw, Georgia look sloppy this year. Their run fits were not the same. Receivers dropping passes, just odd mistakes we don't normally see. And obviously, there's the whole mess off the field where, there's a different arrest for especially driving related just about every week. And, instead of owning up to that, it felt like Kirby Smart spent his whole time just, throwing blame at the committee, throwing blame at refs and Greg Sankey, whoever else he felt like, instead of just looking back and saying, we need to be better and play to our standard. So what has happened to the standard here?
I think it was an off year. I still give them an A because despite all of that, they were in the thick of it. They were right there behind Texas the entire way. That was the difference. Like those errors were the difference in them not making it further in the college football playoff. If they can get some receivers that can catch, maybe they beat Notre Dame in that game. Did they play Notre Dame?
Yeah.
That's what I thought. I played a lot of college football 25 lately, so I can't remember what happened where. But yeah, I still give them an A despite all that. I mean, they overcame adversity. They were right there. They were a couple plays and a few games from like living up to their expectations.
Yeah, I mean, I ended up giving a B plus just because of what I felt like the standard is at Georgia, which is, contending for a national title. Like by the time we got to the playoff, they only got the 2 seed by virtue of winning the SEC. So that was a plus. They did win the SEC. Did they win it because it was weaker than usual? Could be. But, they just, I felt like no one really considered them a threat to win it. And they even had a pretty favorable draw in the playoff, some thought. Like, and, they lost pretty quickly to Notre Dame. So, like, it just wasn't the same this year. While, obviously they were pretty close to potentially, going with a better record, they were also just as close to having a worse record. They got away with quite a few close games. And obviously, like, had some favorable stuff go their way against Georgia Tech, for example. Like, they were close to being even worse. So that was kind of the interesting thing about them. But we'll move on. Next is the Kentucky Wildcats. They went tanked to 4-8 this year. And the question is, has Mark Stoops lost momentum at Kentucky for good?
I think so. Especially with NIL deals. It's easier to get basketball players into Kentucky. It's harder to get football players into Kentucky. They had a good direction going, and then just this year. For that, I give them a D. I think expectations were a little high on them to continue to improve, and they fell flat on their faces.
Yeah, I was even worse than you. I gave them an F. They were very bad. If it wasn't for the random win over Ole Miss, they would have gone winless in SEC play this year. That was their only conference win, was that random game. And, I think they're still producing defensive talent. I don't know if NIL is the reason why they're struggling. I think it's because Mark Stoops refuses to adopt a more modern offense. They just continue to slug around this like offense that just doesn't have an identity. And, they got away with it back when, they had a train of stud running backs coming through. They usually had a quarterback that could.
Liam Cohen in and out of Kentucky.
Yeah, Liam Cohen going in and out. Well, when Liam Cohen was there, that was the one time where they were actually slightly modern. But they kept having like stud running backs coming through. They had a quarterback that could usually bail them out in most spots. But with this kind of offense, you cannot have an offensive line that's as bad as what Kentucky has had in recent years. Their offensive line stunk now, I feel like at least like 3 to 4 years at this point. And they aren't finding solutions there. Like they need this offseason, they have got to I mean, honestly, I felt they should modernize the offense, but I don't think they're going to do that. I don't think he made any changes there. So find something to fix this offensive line at least. Give your quarterback a chance.
Yeah.
The LSU Tigers are next, and they went 9-4 this year, fell short of playoff expectations. The question is LSU stuck in neutral under Brian Kelly?
They are not even in neutral. They slammed that thing in reverse. I think they took a huge step back with Brian Kelly. Yeah, they had a Heisman winner, but they were still 4 losses last year?
Yep.
And 3 or 4 again this year. I think that's who they are with Brian Kelly. I mean, Brian Kelly left Notre Dame, one of the most prestigious institutions in not only college football, but also in academics, to go down south to the Bayou, where it's a state school. Take that how you want it. And the expectation was that he was going to win championships. And I give him a D because he's not very close to winning championships at all.
Yeah, this team was not good last year.
They got bailed out. One last thought. They got bailed out against South Carolina. And they would have lost that game if they didn't get bailed out. So then they would have been a 5-loss team.
Yeah. They had a few breaks go their way in order to finish 9-4. This wasn't like, 9-4 and they took some close losses along the way. This was 9-4 and it could have been worse. I gave them a C- for a lot of the same reasons that you just mentioned. But yeah, I mean, they're really not going in any positive direction. Every season seems to open with some silly loss on opening night, on opening Sunday usually. Unfortunately, this next year, their opener against Clemson will not be on Sunday. I wish it was, so we can keep tradition going. But they open it up the same way, and then they go through conference play. They usually end up losing some key games throughout the year. They have not fixed their defense. Their defense definitely struggled this past year. And, I feel like we're about to go through the same rhythm again because I'm already seeing LSU show up in the top 10 of preseason polls. So we're going to go through this again, guys. Get ready. But yeah, I think Brian Kelly is stuck in neutral here. And yeah, I think this is just what they are under him. Next is the Mississippi State Bulldogs. They went 2-10 this past year, did not win a single SEC game. And I'll be honest, like this team was that perfect team that like I spent almost no time watching simply because none of their games were competitive. They beat Eastern Kentucky and UMass easily and basically got blown out in every single conference game and also got blown out by Toledo and Arizona State. Like this team was just not good. They have a long road ahead.
They have plummeted since the Dak Prescott years. I give him an F. I don't think there's any. I mean, maybe an F- is a grade that you can make up, but they don't really have those in real life. So I'll give them an F. They were terrible. They might as well not be an SEC team if they're going to continue to field this level of talent.
I mean, yeah, they would have. This team would have been bottom in the MAC. But they did have a first-year head coach.
Second to last, because UMass is going to the MAC soon.
Yes.
So they would have finished.
They do have a first-year head coach. So I gave him an exception for that. I gave them a C- because of that. But again, I think for Mississippi State fans, the less time we spend talking about this team, the better, because there's nothing redeeming about this team. There really isn't.
Fire everyone. We'll see what
this. Well, first year head coach, Matt. Come on.
Fire everyone.
No one got fired, by the way. So they are continuing with the same coordinators, everything. Lots of new players. Nobody wanted them. Lots of new players, so we'll see what happens there. Next, the Missouri Tigers. They went 10-3. Actually, kind of quietly had a solid season.
When you think of Missouri, you think of like a 4, 5, or 6 loss team, probably closer to a 5 or 6 loss team. I gave them a B plus. I think they didn't quite live up to the expectations from the year before. I think a lot of people had them pegged as like a 1 loss team. They are in a grueling schedule in SEC play. But I think they handled themselves halfway decent. I think they could have been better. Hence the B plus.
Yeah, I gave him a B. Just a very solid B. On one hand, 10-3. That's a very good record for Missouri. A very good year, but at the same time, like it just felt like it didn't click as well as we thought it would entering the season. Like Brady Cook didn't quite play as well, and then obviously he missed a few games, so that kind of hurt too. And obviously Luther Burden was a stud, but they didn't get to really showcase him as much as we expected. So, the thing that helped them avoid regressing a lot further was the fact that they did a really good job in close games. They managed to get a lot of close wins, and that kept them to a 10-win record, and I'd say a pretty successful year. So, yeah, I gave them a B for that. Next, the Oklahoma Sooners. They went 6-7, and in their first
Oklahoma,
year,
where the wind comes rolling down the plain.
they went 6-7 in their first year in the SEC. And I think we have to beg the question, is Oklahoma going to be the SEC's Nebraska?
I would agree. But since it's their first year in a better conference, I'm gonna give them a C minus. I'm gonna give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. They have a relatively newer coach. They have a relatively newer team. This isn't the Lincoln Riley, Oklahoma that got them into the SEC. This is a new identity. And I think the same thing that I said about Alabama can be said about Oklahoma. I think they have a future. I think it's going to be a little bit of growing pains to get where they want to be. First year in the SEC, could have done better, but I'll give them a C minus.
I gave him a D plus. Brent Venables is in his third year. And I mean, how did he do this so quickly? When he took over, Oklahoma was a team that was on several years of having a top 5 offense and like almost bottom 5 defense. In just 3 years, he managed to bring the defense to one of the top 10 defenses in the country. And now their offense was pretty much bottom 5 in the country. Their offense was just so bad this past year. And this is with a quarterback who was a 5-star and Jackson Arnold. They end up benching him very quickly. They ran Dylan Gabriel out of town to have Jackson Arnold as their quarterback. And then I think it was like 3, whenever they played Tennessee, it's like 3-4 games in, immediately pulled a plug on him, went with a different quarterback, got the same results. Kind of just flipped back and forth between quarterbacks all year. Honestly, the plus is because they did look really good at that Alabama win.
Yeah, really good. I could see what they had in Arnold when they played in what bowl game was
the
that?
Alamo Bowl.
Alamo Bowl. You could kind of tell what they had. He in crucial moments he ended up throwing a few picks. So you could tell that he had some learning to do. If they find a good offensive coordinator that can kind of turn the offense around a little bit, I think they can get this machine moving a little bit.
Yeah. They are revamping the offense this offseason. New offensive coordinator. Offensive coordinator bringing the quarterback over, which should help with the transition. And it's going to be about finding receivers too. They're going to need to find some receivers for him to throw to. So it'll be interesting. Very, very interesting offseason coming in Norman, Oklahoma. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Next on our list, the Ole Miss Rebels coming into the season powered with transfer portal all-star team. Loads of talent, but and high expectations. They ended up going 10-3 and missing the playoff. We have to beg the question: has Lane Kiffin hit his ceiling at Ole Miss?
I think that Ole Miss is the Penn State of the SEC, the little brother that just can't get over the hump. And I mean, it seems like sometimes Lane Kiffin can't get out of his own way. I mean, they fielded a good team. They had semi-favorable schedule, and they just didn't compete the way they thought. I mean, I still gave him a B plus just because Lane Kiffin is the James Franklin of the SEC, but that no better.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing. They could not help but to stub their toe anytime they were in a good position. The home loss to Kentucky, we talked about Kentucky earlier, and based on what we said there, that was inexcusable. You cannot do that. You cannot lose at home and give that team their only conference win if you expect to reach the playoff. And then, you get later in the year, they kind of bought themselves an extra chance with the impressive win over Georgia. But they also had a game escape them against LSU that they should have won. Then, they play Florida late in the year, win that game and you're in. And for some reason, like just all sorts of Lane Kiffin makes just all sorts of weird calls throughout the game on fourth downs that cost them the game. Like they had a 300 something pound lineman, carry the ball, which is something they've done, but you have that man take the shortest route possible to the first down. For some reason, he had him do a, like a power O instead. And of course, that guy is not meant to move laterally. He's meant to move straight ahead. And that cost him that game. So I gave him a B minus. The 10-3 is still an amazing season for Ole Miss. The big difference between Ole Miss and Penn State is that Ole Miss does not have the history that Penn State does. 10-3 is a very good season for Ole Miss's program, but with the talent they had, it also felt like underachieving a little bit. Next is the South Carolina Gamecocks. They went 9-4, ended the season really hot until a loss in their bowl game. Was this the breakthrough season for Shane Beamer?
I think so. I mean, South Carolina, I'm going to give them, I know I texted you B, but I'm going to give them a B plus. If it wasn't for the refs intervening, they would have been a 3-loss team. And I think the other 2 losses were 1-score losses. So they were right there. I think South Carolina got a really good QB in the
yeah, they have Lenora Sellers.
Yeah, no, but they got another one. Or like
I think they got another one.
They got like a 5-star athlete, and I think they're headed in the right direction. I think B plus for me is, I mean, I could probably go into the A range, but they couldn't pull it off in a few close games.
Yeah, I mean, they had a chance against Alabama at Alabama. They recovered an onside kick, only had a few more yards to go to get in field goal range to win that game. But, Sellers, being the young quarterback he was, just was a little too eager to make a play and threw a pick. And then obviously you covered the LSU game pretty well, what happened there. Win one of those, and South Carolina is in the college football playoff. That is impressive. Mm-hmm. And once again, until the bowl loss to Illinois, which is, by the way, so I think the bowl loss is why it ended up dropping to a B plus for me. Otherwise, it would have been an A. I was very close to giving them an A anyways, because this was a very good year for them. This team was one of the hottest in the country down the stretch. Now, obviously for this offseason, the big key is how do they keep that going? what do they do this offseason to make sure they keep it going and don't have a sudden regression over the offseason? Because we saw this a few years ago. Remember when the Spencer Rattler year, when they finished the season strong, beat Clemson, beat Tennessee, and then had a close bowl loss. And then, they came in the next year of high expectations and fell flat. So that's going to be the big key, is making sure they keep the momentum going this time around. It feels like with that defense and having a guy in Lenore Sellers that they're going to be able to do that. So future's looking very good in Columbia, South Carolina.
Yep.
Next is the Tennessee Volunteers. This was in a way a breakthrough season for Tennessee. They reached the college ball playoff for the first time, going 10-3. This was a great year for them. This was huge for Tennessee to return to that stage. So why does it feel like it wasn't as great as my first sentence made that sound?
First of all, they didn't seem like anything special. They just kind of jumped into 10-3. I think the expectation for Tennessee, at least among Tennessee fans, was undefeated. They didn't do that. And so I give them a B plus. I think, and that's based solely on the expectations that Vols fans had. Nico was early favorite to win the Heisman, one of the favorites to win the Heisman. He didn't play nearly as well as I thought he would. And then about partway through the season, I was like, wow, this team is trash. I blink, we're near the end of the season, all of a sudden they're in the thick of it, and I was like, wow, this maybe they're not as trash as I thought. So
yeah, I ended up giving them A because reaching the playoff was a huge deal. But they had a star quarterback and had a lot of good receivers. They were expected to have this high flying offense. And I think they had like a stretch of like 3 or 4 games, so they didn't score in the first half. That was astoundingly bad. And now the culprit for that was, in past years, they had a good offensive line. They did not find the proper replacements this past year, and the offensive line really struggled a lot. That weighed them down a lot. They had to rely on the run game for the most part. Obviously the loss to Arkansas was a little rough. They still couldn't get past Georgia, but at the same time, like Tennessee did beat their main rivals. They beat Alabama. They beat Florida. That was good. That was very good. And that is something that I think looking back, Tennessee fans will be very excited about. But, obviously this offseason, it's about, figuring out how the offensive line, getting your young quarterback more comfortable and getting this offense back to what you're used to. Before, I almost forgot to mention, which I should not forget, their defense was the other thing that carried them. Their defense was really good, and that's something to build around as well.
Yeah.
Next is Texas A&M. The Aggies finished
technically in alphabetical order, it would have been Texas.
Whatever. We're going Texas A&M. The Aggies finished 8-5. They actually started out doing a lot better than that. They were in the thick of the playoff race in November. But the question is, does a rough finish sour Mike Elko's debut season?
I think it does. I give them a C. They started off early, losing to Notre Dame, in a really good primetime game. I think that night game was fantastic. It looked like they had the pieces to contend, especially early on, and then it just seems like they faded away. And then they came back, and then they faded away, and then they came back. But I think ultimately the nail in the coffin was their last loss in That's the most recent memory we have of this team, and they didn't play well. So going into next season, they're gonna have to fix quite a few things. But for this past season, give them a C.
Yeah, I gave him a C plus. So for one, though, that I mean, this is Elko's first year, so there was definitely a lot to figure out there, and there was a lot of talent drain after Jimbo Fisher left. A lot of guys who were highly decorated recruits for this team went elsewhere over the offseason. So there's definitely a lot of talent drain there. And I wanted to keep that in mind when evaluating this team. Um, you know, Started out the season strong, only losing Notre Dame. I think they were at least like 6-1, 7-1 at one point. But then there's just how they finished the year. Finishing the year going 1-4 in their last 5 games. Most notable thing late in the year is a win over LSU. The reason why I gave a C plus instead of in the B range is because that just sounded so familiar. That sounded exactly like a Jimbo Fisher year, where they faded down the stretch, but hey, they beat LSU. So yeah, I gave it a C plus. Obviously, just I think there's some encouraging stuff here to build on, though. There's definitely a lot of that start was something encouraging for this team. They're going to continue building. We know they have incredible NIL setup to keep getting recruits in. They just need to figure out more consistency on the offense, and on the defense, just kind of figuring out how to get better on run fits is going to be a huge key for them. So next on our list here is the Texas Longhorns. Matt, Texas is back.
They're back, baby. Yeah. As a Notre Dame fan, that actually kind of hurt a little bit, but I gave them an A plus. I mean, the questions going into the season were, can they contend in the SEC? They clearly contended in the Big 12. Can they translate that over to SEC play? They handled business in the SEC. They were not that competitive against Ohio State, but frankly, not many teams were after they lost to Michigan. So, yeah, I mean, Texas, they're going into their Arch Manning years. Now is the time to start hoisting trophies if you're going to do it. So expectations are extremely high right now for Texas. They lived up to the expectations this past year, which is why I gave them an A plus. They're contenders.
Yeah. I think we're starting to see the rise of the Texas program here. I give them A minus. For the most part, most of it was up to expectations. Making the semifinals was very good. They could not stop Georgia. They lost both games there, even with Georgia having a backup quarterback the second time around for the second half. So that was kind of the downside to them. Obviously they also got a very favorable schedule. It was actually surprising how favorable their schedule was, facing most of the bottom that I think they faced like the bottom 7 teams in the SEC. So that definitely helped their record out a little bit. So maybe that's why I was a little harsh on them, giving it an A minus. But I mean, let's face it, it's A minus. This is still a very good year. Texas is going in the Arch Manning years, and they are certainly looking like a team that is going to be a top threat in this conference for a long time. They are back.
They're back, baby. They are back. They are back.
Next up, the Vanderbilt Commodores. They managed to ascend to a 7-6 season. Vandy, we turned. I left the cuss word out of that, but
yeah. I like what Vanderbilt did. New Mexico State. They played very well. I gave them a B plus, just because they really couldn't finish anything. They still finished mid pack, kind of lower in the SEC, but they beat the dog snot out of Alabama. I can't remember the last time we heard Vanderbilt beat Alabama. That statistic is somewhere, but I don't have it in front of me. They played
Yeah,
really
that was
well.
one of the moments of the season.
That was a highlight of the season. Like if you were to forget just talking about Vanderbilt for a second, if you're gonna 10 years from now, you're gonna look back, you're gonna be like, oh yeah, 2024. That was a great year for Vanderbilt. They beat Alabama. Like that was a highlight of the season. I think for a lot of people, except unless you're in Tuscaloosa. But Vandy, you no longer have to hang that scoreboard from a crane. Now you have earned the stationary scoreboard.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard to tell like what they could do to get out of the basement of the SEC. And it was an aggressive move, changing up the offense, basically taking an entire New Mexico State team and importing their offense here. And it worked. It made Vanderbilt, I give them an A because I really don't know what more they can do other than do this. Make a bowl game, win a bowl game, be that pesky thorn in the side of much better SEC teams and pull out the occasional upset. I think this is probably the best existence that Vanderbilt can have. We can wrap this up with the independents. We start with by the way, I had UConn and UMass as the U in front. So first in alphabetical order here is Notre Dame. The Irish went 14-2, made the national championship game. 2024 was the year that Notre Dame turned into a championship contender.
I give them an A, and the same reason applies for Notre Dame as it does for Ohio State. Notre Dame lost a very bad game to. Weren't they also a 5-loss team, Justin?
Northern Illinois,
Yeah,
5 or 6.
yeah, somewhere in there. So roughly the same record, probably a lot less talent. They lost a terrible game to Northern Illinois at home. You can't do that. I still give them an A because they were able to turn around, make it all the way to the championship. They kept their noses in every game in the playoff. They even started coming back against Ohio State, and had they had some kind of coverage on that last throw by Will Howard, probably could have made it an even better ending. But I give him an A.
I gave him an A plus. I mean, I know that loss happened, but this Notre Dame in our lifetimes hadn't won a big bowl, and they won 2 of them during this playoff run. That was a great accomplishment. And this is the huge breakthrough. This was, Marcus Freeman announced himself as one of the top coaches in college football.
And probably the most likable guy.
Yeah. I mean, Notre Dame has become likable in this sea of madness, with the 2 conferences that we just talked about and, all the stuff that they're doing. Notre Dame being independent kind of has its charm now. And then, Marcus Freeman is also a likable guy. I think we've seen just the beginning here for Notre Dame.
I think so.
I think we're about to see them consistently contend for national titles. So this year was massive for them, a massive building block, and one that will be remembered for Irish fans for a long time.
Yes.
Next, another year that will be remembered for a long time, the Connecticut Huskies went 9-4 and won the Fenway Bowl. How about this 2024 breakthrough for UConn?
I texted you B minus. I had changed it to an A minus or B plus. I had changed it to an A minus. Hell of a season by UConn. They had no expectations, and they shattered nothing. They shattered the nothingness. They proved to the world that they can be something, and here they are.
Yeah, I mean, this is the best season they've had since the random Fiesta Bowl year.
Wasn't
This
that
this was
wasn't that with Dan Orlovsky?
no, I think that was after he left.
Hmm.
Um, but I mean, I think after he left, after Aeropostale left the sport, um, but yeah, UConn. This was a huge season for them. They've been lost in the wilderness for a long time in college football, especially as an independent, just kind of looking for something, just some sort of something to hang their hats on. And this year was it. Behind a strong defense and a good running game, they won a lot of their games and won a lot of them pretty easily, I might add. And then, just really stamped their authority on that with the strong bowl performance. This was a breakthrough season, and I'm excited to see what Jim Mora Jr. is going to continue to do with this program because they're in a better spot now than they've been in a very long time.
Yep.
And finally, we wrap today's show up by talking about the Massachusetts Minutemen. Entering this year with a little bit of hope, maybe they could finally hit the kind of breakthrough that UConn hit. It didn't happen. They went 2-10. Head coach Don Brown was let go. Can UMass football ever find its footing?
No, not in FBS. Maybe if they can maintain some consistency in terms of conference, they can establish some type of identity outside of just trash. Maybe moving to the MAC gives them that identity. And they can maybe get mid-tier there, but this year you're able to choose your own schedule, and you did not do great at that. So I gave them an F.
Well, I mean, okay, so their schedule was a lot of a lot of playing back at SEC teams. Like they were like a hybrid back at SEC team, basically. Because that is most of what they played. I think they also played I think their 2 wins were over teams from the NEC. So there was that as well. But no, I think they can get there one day. I think being back in the MAC, for a more solid this time, like back in the MAC for good, I would say. I think that's going to help them. I think giving themselves a home is going to help. That was huge for them. It's going to be a long road. It's already been a long road for them, but I think this is going to 2025 is going to be a new start for UMass, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. We are almost at 2 hours, so apologies for the length. We had to get in 35 teams today in the Uber conferences and independents. So in the future, we'll look to shorten that time a little bit.
College football teams, you please split up a little bit or something. Your conferences are just too big.
Yeah. We don't want to do like 9 separate shows. We don't have 9 weeks to get these grades out, and we definitely don't have the time for multiple shows. So yeah, split up or something so we can get more teams in and maybe a more competitive environment. So that is it. Like, subscribe, give us some love, watch our videos. We're trying to make a living out of this eventually. Follow us on X, Threads, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We're going to be posting a lot more on each of those. So give us a follow. We love conversation, so help us keep the conversation going. We'll see you guys next time.
See you later.